Welcome everybody to the sessions What are artifacts and why are they important? My name is Mark van Roosing. Here you have a little bit descriptions about myself. So the short version is I am specialized in standards. I'm specialized in relationships, objects, metamodels, ontologies. I do work together with, I literally developed also SAP's implementation method, SAP's agile concepts, SAP's BPM concepts, and SAP enterprise architecture concepts. So I've been a part developer there, also been part of TOGAF, developing TOGAF 9 with an upgrade. I worked there in the business architecture teams, being within there. Then I'm a chairman of the OMG. I'm actually there the chairman of the business architecture group. So we do a lot of there about business architecture objects, business architecture artifacts, business architecture views, etc. Then I'm a development member of the Information Security Forum, Energetics, that's a standard body in oil and gas. Then I'm a development member for NATO, where we do the development of the NATO architecture frameworks and standards. Then I work with the ISO, where it's a system and software engineering standard. It's ISO 279. That's an innovation standard. Then I also work in the World Wide Web Consortium about repeatable patterns. So in short, I do a lot of standards development and concepts, and then I work with a lot of organizations, which is also the reasons today I want to do this session on what are artifacts, how can they be used, what is the value of working with artifacts. The examples used across these presentations is with Handelsbanken in Sweden, a great company. They have a specific project around BCBS 239, where I created with them together the Metamodel and a meta-model and specific objects that they need to be handling. And around there, we will be doing how would you do artifact maps, how would you do a matrix. And once we have shown this in examples, we will do lessons learned. And there I will be discussing a little bit what's rollout, training, consistencies, etc. And then we will be discussing takeaways. Good. That's the purpose of today, and also a little bit the learnings that have the goal. Let's start with the first subject. Artifacts, what is it and why is it important? So, well, the very shortest version is that an artifact is a documentation product. In this case, well, what kind of documentation product? Well, any kind of documentations. At home, you can document how many tables you have, how many chairs you have. Obviously, that maybe wouldn't be so difficult, but if you would be documenting certain complex things about your building at home, you would maybe use an artifact, meaning a map / a list of things. Or you would say, oh, the wood in that area has these concerns. So you would start relating things together, the wood to certain parts of the building, to maybe the roof or to the structure. That would typically be matrices. So this can be in spreadsheets, this can be in Word documents, this can be all kinds of things. It can also be in a video. So the short version is an artifact in this context of often enterprise architecture, or other words used for artifacts could be a template. Engineers typically call it a template. If you, however, are talking with process people or service people, then they would often talk about models. In this case, then these models with viewpoints are also specific artifacts. So, therefore, while having different names, it's actually the same thing. The most important purpose of using artifacts is to establish a specific and very clear definitions of the objects that are within them. Now we're going to call these objects or components within the artifacts, we will call them meta-objects. It's called a meta-object because it is the component that actually now can be documented, is within it, that is found within there. So once you have such artifacts and you have agreed on definition, it can be rolled out to relevant programs, projects, team, employees across multiple organizational boundaries and actually also business units, teams, etc. This means that a common understanding and consensus has been reached within the organization for what name a particular meta-object has and where it can be found and what kind of artifact. So that helps in organizations to first of all have a clear picture, know where it is, know how it can be governed, know how it can be upgraded or changed, etc. And there's more consistency, but we will come to that a little bit later. For those of you who would like a little bit more reading on the subject, I have attached on the bottom the official Elsevier publications where you can read something about why I work with templates. So let's have the next one. A very smart way of doing this is to enforce the usage of the same artifacts, meaning templates or models, across various teams that use the same objects. And now let me also state already here, that is one of the most important things already in the start. If you do not have standardized artifacts in your organizations or in your team or in your architecture groups or in your modeling groups or others, etc., etc., then you will actually, doesn't matter what you do, you will keep on investing in some of the same things because you keep on doing over and over, and everybody does it different, and everybody has a little bit twist on it, and everybody means that they can document it their own ways, which in the end of the day is the reasons of high cost and low maturity. So here I've done a little diagram which you are seeing, which on the very right there is an example. In the middle you see the view, meaning in this case the object. The description, a real life object represented within a model, meaning an artifact. An example would be a business service. For those of you who know MOF from OMG, that would be relevant here or equal to the MOF layer M0. Now if you are looking at the objects are represented and are found within the artifacts, meaning the models. And the artifacts therefore also capture and describe the objects. So here, good example is if the object would be a business service, that would be a service model or a service map. If the artifact would be a map, if the artifact is a model, obviously it's a service model. It could also be, the object could be a process. Then the artifact, if it would be a process map, then if the artifact over here would be a process map. So I hope that makes sense. That would be equal to the MOF layer called M1. If you, however, in your organizations have a meta model, if you have literally taken the time and defined for your program, for your project, or for your enterprise architecture, or for your tool, a sound and good meta model, then Your artifacts, your models, meaning your objects relates to the artifacts, the models, they are described within there. And obviously all the artifacts and models should be conforming to the meta model. The meta model in this case is an instance of a meta model defined and describes the objects within the models. So here you would have class, attribute, and instances. That would be equal to what is called an M2. If your organization has received the architecture maturity or the modeling maturity or the ontological maturity of having developed already a meta model in your organizations, meaning of how things fit all together, that could be for an entire program, that you would have multiple projects beneath, or it would be for an entire enterprise, or for your entire architecture, or for your process. So you can create what is called a higher level, which defines and describes the meta models, lower level, more detailed granularity, conforming to itself. So the meta model is conforming to itself. The meta models, however, is an instance of a meta model, which also conforms to the meta model, and the meta model describes the meta models. The meta model, however, describes the artifacts, and the artifacts which describes the objects which are represented in the artifacts conforms to the meta model. I know this is a lot of theory that you say, whoa, that was a lot. Yes, but this is where we start to understand the very basics of thinking how it should be organized in organizations. Today, most organizations, they allow all their teams to define their own objects. They define their own artifacts. And it's totally wild. It's a jungle on meta models. And they often don't have a meta model. Or we see they have described objects. They have described a meta model. Sometimes they take some from the vendors, not even realizing, yeah, that vendor has a very specific meta model because it is for their specific tool. So you could find such meta models in TOGAF. The TOGAF meta model, I've worked with it a lot. Wonderful piece of work. Very good, and it's a very good start. But if you would want to capture all components of an enterprise, you would truly see it is limited, extremely limited. As an example, it doesn't even have a platform device. So if you would say, and today there's lots of platform devices, or it doesn't have multiple other components where you would say a platform service or an infrastructure service. Today in a service-oriented architecture, that happens to be quite a lot important. So everything is described as a service there, as a business service, but a business service is not equal. Also, they don't differentiate between an application service and a data service. So it's really too limited to do the detailed modeling, engineering, and architecture that is needed. But I'm not here to criticize everything. I'm here to pinpoint, to bring the right level of thinking, and then say, and obviously also, and it doesn't criticize it because TOGAF actually says to every company, this is a starting point, please tailor it and add or take away what you need. So it was just an example. There is lots of other good meta models out in the market that could be a start. Good. Having discussed that, so our discussions today will be focusing from level M0, M1, and M2. I will also make a very, very short example on M3, but there's mostly around the M1 area and therefore the related things. We will mostly show objects found in specific artifacts and how you are creating artifacts that can be cross-integrated. So, having discussed what an artifact is, meaning a documentation product, we will now discuss what is the value of working with artifacts. And I want to take that up front before we go through a lot of examples and then everybody in the end just, oh yeah. Now the value of artifacts, here's the list of the 10 top values of working with artifacts. First one, you have documentation, and you have a consistency of documentation. That was the number 2. Then you are building bridges, meaning you stop each and every one to do it different, which actually is the center and the pain point and the center of the storm of all the problems most organizations actually have. That's point number 3. Also, point number 4 is a big pain in many organizations. They are really running behind governance, actually not realizing, well, the reasons you have that pain point is actually because you are not doing 1 and 2 very good. And you are not doing 3 at all. That's why you have a problem in your governance. That's why you also have a problem in your control. That's why continuous improvement is a heavy subject for you. And you are also not very effective, and you are also not very efficient. And you have difficulty integrating things. Well, that's all based on, if you are using standardized artifacts, you have all of these points given. And what you get at last, but not least, which is also very important, is point number 10. You get a common way of thinking and a common way of working, which, let's face it, the most teams don't really have that. So these are the 10 top value points of working with artifacts. Let's now go into and discuss and show some of these artifacts. The examples I will be using from here on will be examples based on Handelsbanken, and this is around the project BCBS 239. They needed to be compliant, which actually all banks need to be around the world. In this case, they are created, do a humongous amount of good work. I was very impressed working with the teams there. Obviously, it's also very complex too, that there comes a new regulation out. They need to be compliant to it. How in the world are they doing it? So in this case, it would be smart working with integrated artifacts. I will be showing how could this be done and how would you set this up. So first one I want to start with. Now I realize that you are not seeing everything here, and you are not supposed to see everything here. That's absolutely okay. I'm going to zoom in very short on this for you just to see a very high level of this. So this is literally the Handelsbanken Metamodel, where you would see, you would have color codes within it. These color codes are the different projects and programs that are involved with it. In this case, you also see some dots. I'm going to go down here. The dots mean that this is core to the teams. So the data objects and the data table and the data component is core. The application role is relevant, and it's relevant for the CEDA quality, but it is not core as a core piece. This does not mean it's not important. They just identified some to say these are critical. So you see here that the data object are actually touched by multiple teams. Now my question to you, without that I realize you cannot answer it because this is a web session, but what happens if you have 2, 4, 6 teams touching the same meta objects, and it is not standardized and it is not integrated? Yes, then there's high likelihood that they will do it differently. They describe it differently, they work about it differently, they document it differently. There will be inconsistency, there will be problems of integrations, there will be inefficiencies, ineffectiveness, and actually the very result is to be doubted as well. Governance will be a nightmare. So also here you see that the data objects needs to relate to the data tables. But the data objects actually are encapsulated and work with the data services. Also the data objects need to be related to the data rules. So we are seeing, and multiple more. So I'm not going to go through all of them at the moment. It's just to give an idea. In this case, it also defines the importance of that the data object needs to be integrated to certain aspects here. We are seeing very strongly here that the data object, you have application components and you have application tasks. The application tasks uses both the data objects, the data, and the data objects also relate over here to the data warehouse. So you see there's a lot of relationships within them. And if one would capture and now would have to make it compliant, because in this case, the project needed to be having which credit and financial agreements have what kind of data objects, what kind of risks within it, what is the products that relate to it, which information objects are found within this products and with which agreements, what kind of risk relates to them, what kind of quality parts do we apply within it. Also, this needs to be applied to the risk reports, to the risk analysis, to the risk measures, to the risk monitoring, to the risk calculations, and obviously to the risk controls. So we are seeing this has certain complexity built into it. It is not the Metamodel that makes this complex. This Metamodel just documents of what the bank said. This is the world we are within. This is what we are faced with. So let's go back again to the overview. And this is only one from actually, I think it was a 50-page document describing all the objects, all the definitions, how they should be relating, where they are, which team works with what. So very, very impressive, very, very nice. And it helps the teams actually to understand what they are doing where. So once this is done, now they want to work with a different map. They want to document and map these different objects. Now, therefore, let me describe what is an artifact map. Well, very easy. A map is a list of things. The longer version is you can actually find here, which actually says an artifact map is an accurate list and representations of a decomposed and or composed meta object. Easily, it's like a process map is a list of processes. Why do you have that? Well, it's an inventory, an index of things. So it's needed, it's quite important. You could have report maps, data maps, process maps, you could have service maps, you could have regulations maps, etc., etc. So there could be all kinds of artifacts that are just a map. Let me now go into the example of one. So the one I want to show is around risk reporting. In this case, risk reporting, we see that the following object needs to be integrated. You would have the laws and regulations. Why? Because that's where you take the organizational rules that require the reporting. You also need the locations. You actually don't need the specific report. Which report am I talking about? Then which regulations it relates to. Then which information objects are found within there. Which data objects are found within there. Which applications are found within there. Which etc. etc. So you could be doing all kinds of things within here. So having established just some of the things that matter for such a risk reporting map. Here I'm showing on the example of Handelsbanken which objects did they choose that they needed to capture that were relevant for risk reporting. So you see risk reporting here in the middle. You also see this is one of the critical objects they identified to solve or do the things that they want to have captured. In this case, we are seeing risk, so they are saying they need to identify in the risk report the risks. They also need to have the regulations, they also need to have the locations, they also need to have products, they also need to have the data objects, the applications, etc. So there's multiple things that they are saying that they need to have within this. Some of them are literally enhanced here. So you will have on the left side, you are seeing they already have 5 meta objects that they are all saying that are critical for the entire projects. Now, here comes the challenge. Many of these objects on itself are handled by multiple other teams, so if they are not doing anything standardized, the likelihood that they will have ever anything that they can work with integrated is zero. It's mathematically nearly impossible. They would really have to throw in a lot of money and a lot of governance and a lot of control if they are not using standardized artifacts. So the easiest way would actually be to use standardized artifacts. Have a clear definition for the objects and the types, the class types and the subtypes of them, or what's called stereotypes and the subtypes, and then have them documented in a common way. Here's the definitions and the descriptions that they have done. This is a part of a work I have literally done with them together. So they have also have on the left side, you see here, these are the shapes that they have. This is a report, that is a risk, that is a locations, that is a product. So they have very specific shapes to it. Then this is the meta object, and then there is a description to it. A very clear descriptions that everybody has. So why is it that they have a graphical representation left? Well, that's used later on for the models. So steps are typically defined of how to go about it. So you identify and list the reports, including the name of each report. You actually give it then an ID number. Then you specify the risk subject, then you pinpoint the regulations that are specific to it, then which locations is it at where this regulations actually applies. Then you have what is it the risk within it, what is it the measurements, what is it the information objects and data objects, and what are the applications that could be relevant, what would be the data media, etc. This is just a list of things right now. Could be many, many, many more. Could also be involved parties, involved roles, which you will see in the examples I will be showing. So this right now could be such a reporting map. So in this case, an organization could be getting a specialist in, or they have a specialist of developing an artifact. Now the artifact obviously needs to be built on some sort of meta model and some sort of object with clear definitions. If it is not done so, and the teams have just done it, and it's typically a guy who thinks he's the gift to mankind, who has developed it. If he has not developed it on clear objects that have clear definitions and clear descriptions that everybody can reuse and that fits to all of the components within it, if that does not fit to it and it doesn't have a meta model behind it, don't let him do it. Please don't. Such two things must be given in order that it is a sound artifact and can be integrated to the rest, just like I showed before. Here's an example of how it is filled out. Now this is the example of Handelsbanken. Now this is the only thing in red. This on the left I added. I didn't add the other things here in red. So here you would see the reports listed. Obviously, you would have here report noun. That is Swedish, which actually means name. Then you have roles involved, the owners, ansvarlig afdeling, which is actually the responsible department, which are the owners of this report. This report obviously then gets a number. This is something I added for this web session. It must have, it can be all, if it already has a number, it doesn't matter, you put that in. If not, it needs to have, because you need to start to be able to track it. Then you can also have the roles involved of who receives the reports. These would be all of this. This is Riksbanken, which is actually the central bank. Or multiple others could be receiving them. Then there are other receivers, meaning there are others who receive this report or parts of this report. These would be the ones. Then are the contributors. So obviously you see here we have quite a lot about the rules. Then we have the regulations. This is also just called involved partners, which is very, very normal. This is then a stereotype of saying, or a class type of saying, well, that's our partners. So then you have here the listing of the regulations, and then as descriptions within it. So this would be a filled out reporting map. What one can do right now is actually to do some sort of categorization or classifications. Now let me describe very short for those of you who don't know so much about categorization and classifications, which in my years of teaching and training architects around the world and modelers, and having worked with OMGs and NATO and all the other parts, I've actually found out there are very, very few people who actually know what they're talking about when they talk about categorization and classification. Actually, most people I meet don't even know the difference between categorization and classification. They kind of like say, yeah, this is that and this is it, but they can't really describe it. So let me very short describe. Categorizations is to put things into categories, meaning groups. Then classifications is literally to put them into classes and therefore to, for example, assemble by order. 1, 2, 3, A, B, C. So process levels, process level 1, process level 2, process level 3, process level 4, they are classifications because it's an assembled by order. While you would find reporting types, that's a category. Reporting priorities, which is priority 1, priority 2, priority 3, that's classifications. Then you have at which level it is, at which tier it is, a strategic tier of the enterprise, a tactical tier, or the operational tier. So for those of you who say, whoa, this is something I need to read a little bit more about, I understand right now we have a web sessions and we cannot teach everything within it. Why? Because our focus is on artifacts, not on the subject of categorizations or classifications. For those of you who would like to read some more about it, here's the official paper. There's a book actually to it. It's a 800-page book, but here's the paper that are specific to it. It's the official OMG standard body book, leading practice book, Global University Alliance book, and Elsevier book. So this would be where you can read something about classifications and categorizations concepts. So how could such categorizations look? This way. So they are saying that these reports are of strategic tier, meaning strategic level. These are tactical, meaning more they're about control, governance, evaluations, audits. And these are operational, meaning they are more about execution, delivery, processing, etc. So here you see the types, and here you have certain different priorities. That is a very normal thing to do. So this also means that the artifacts grow over time. You first start, which I showed before, you first map it, which is just like here. Why? Well, you can't categorize and classify anything if you haven't documented it yet. So obviously the first thing is you document it, then you start to define which kind of categorizations and classifications do we want, and then you apply it. Hope that makes sense for everybody. That would be at least the smartest and the fastest way to do it. Here's additional categorizations that could be added. There could be the requirement, that's a quality classifications you can add. You can also do additional categorizations here. Do I want it by the time classifications? So you could have time delivered, time outcome, the time effort. You could have multiple parts. Here's an example where this is filled out, where you literally have within here, I'm going to zoom in, you have right now the time, the frequency of the report. Then you have what is the need, the to be, meaning today it is this, but here it needs to be much, much more. So then the time classification, so they have done with stress levels, with data parts of saying how much does it take. They have also said which outcome is it, which we have, how many days does it take, which typical additional time effort does it take, and which do we always end up of having a little bit more within it. And I mean, obviously having 30% more is something that you would want to document, of saying, well, for the most, we are working with this much more than it's anticipated. So that could be such a categorization and classifications that could be added, which makes very much sense, at least for those who do the reports and who actually are responsible for delivering them, which we already have over here, the owners. Could also be with those actually responsible creating it. So once I have such a very nice and very detailed map, now I have which report are we talking about, who's involved in developing, who owns them, when do we need to do it, and which regulations is relevant to that. Very good. Now you want to do something with it to add more complexity into it, because you need to know which applications do we pull these reports from, which data are found within them, which information objects, which rules do we set to it, etc. So there are certain things you still need to relate to this, and this is also the right word, it is relate. And this is where the matrix comes in. So therefore, the next part of the session is how to work with artifacts of matrices. Now a matrix, let's first describe it. Now a matrix, very easily, it cross-relates something. So you have a list of things. Now you relate something, another thing to it. So here it says the core idea of a matrix is that it typically consists of aspects in a list of rows. Another idea is a set of columns taken from the map. So you would have the map there that we had before, which was this map. Now you would start to relate a third component to it or an additional component. You can add it to the map, but when you relate and it's not naturally related to it, and you don't find in the report the data objects, so you would have to relate to it even though it's within it. So additional components that would want to be wished to be related to it was data objects, application systems, information objects. So there were certain parts here that needed to be added to the top components. Some of these are found here, like for example, which locations is relevant for that. What is actually the risk we are doing within it? That's quite relevant. So you have a risk report, but you are saying, what kind of risk analysis do we have? What's our risk measure? So what is actually our risk type within it? And then which data objects do I have? Or which product does it relate to? Here's again some of the definitions that are clear. So a matrix could be looking like this. So here I want to relate to this regulations, and to that report I have this risk. And obviously you are giving it a risk number because you want to be able to track the risk. Now I put it down here on the left because this is how you mostly work in a matrix to relate to it. Afterwards, once you have related to it, you can actually just add it in the back, like here, where I showed it here. So I have here the risk number, I have related it now, and then I have the risk type. Within this report, which has that report type, which has these responsible, and this is the risk type that is within it. This is about liquidity risk, while this is about market risk, and that is about credit risk. Here you are seeing, here while the numbers here, each one has a different number. Over here, this is risk type 1, this is also 1, this is also 1. These are 2, these are 3, and oops, here comes again 2. Because this is how you are actually, you can then sort this and say, show me all the ones with liquidity risk. Which, by the way, now I can start to govern this much better and work much more advanced and much smarter with it. Then it's mostly done. Most organizations I encounter, even who use artifacts, don't even know the power of artifacts. They, for the most, are missing the red components here that I marked, which is the numbers, so they are not tracking things individually. So having established that, let's move on. I can also, one of the things that was important that we wanted was the application systems involved. I mean, let's face it, these reports today are done based on systems. I need to know which application systems, and this I need the specific application component and the source. Again, I add it to the left, I start to matrix it, find out where it relates, and then I add it in the back of saying, voila, I now have my report, here's the report categorizations, here are the regulations that relate to it, these are the locations that actually do it, which in this case, this report is only done in Sweden, and it has market risk in it, but these report, who has also market risk within it, are done in all other locations of Handelsbanken, which is very important to know. Now here I could start to seeing, oops, I have the same applications doing these two reports, which is also good, because it has the same risk type within it. Later on you will see the risk measure within it that you can then actually see of saying, is it also the same risk measure, because then we could be reusing things. So actually it could be improving the work for the organization. This is not only about architecture or engineering or modeling discipline. It can actually help improve it, sometimes by over improvements of 30, 40, 50, sometimes even 70%, because organizations don't realize of how much they duplicate in these reports. And this is in nearly all industries. It doesn't matter if you are pharmaceutical, or if you are chemical, or if you are a bank, or if you are a high-tech manufacturer, or if you are even a government organization. The level of reporting that is needed today is an immense amount. And actually all industries are doing the same mistakes. They are automating all these reports and never having rethought it and saying which of this has duplications, which of this can be done a different way. They actually automate them all individually, making the IT infrastructure even more complex and difficult. And the business intelligence, there is no intelligence in it. It's actually business analytics. They are not using a very intelligent way of going about it. Anyway, I don't need to push on those buttons. If not, I can keep on talking about that. Let's move on, because there's also other things I want to relate to this. I wanted to have the data objects. So I showed here the data object. We already saw the idea of how to do it. And I could also add data quality to it. That's a classification. So I could be saying high, medium, low. Is this important to have a data quality within it? And then I could actually say, how much is it today? So I could now really start to use the artifacts. Once I start to use it in a matrix form like this, now I'm starting to use very intelligent ways. And I'm starting to do the project with the artifacts. I'm actually start to not only do the blueprint, but to do the documentations and define the assets as well as the to-be. So in this case, I'm going back again to the meta model to say we actually combined all of it together. Now I'm going to go here into the artifact. I want to open it up here. And we are seeing now, because I can literally not show anymore in a PowerPoint the complexity of this. I can have the artifact over here. I have the report. I have if it's strategic, tactical, operational. I have the type. I literally have which priority I have within it. Then I have who's responsible. I have my role categorizations. I have roles involved. The contributors. I also have the descriptions. Here are the information objects. Here are the regulations found within it. Here are the requirement of the quality classifications. Here I have the locations. I have the time components within it. Then I have the risk. I also have the risk measure. So I give the risk measures also a number. Then I have the information objects found within the risk measure. Then I have the application systems, the application components, how it is generating them. Then I have, if I have some comment to the system, at the moment we deleted that because that's obviously not something we want to show right now here. Then we have the calculations within it, then specific data quality aspects, and then data quality issues, pain points, what it needs to be done, which I don't want to go into, classifications of the pain points, the ownerships of the pain point action, meaning that that's the to-do. Here now we are going over to the transformation. So this artifact is actually also being used literally to define the transformation. Then how do they want to do the calculations or the categorizations? Then the data channels involved, because if I'm doing this transformations, which channels are involved? I'm doing this by mails, however, this I'm doing by XBRL and files and etc. and financial systems. Then I also document which processes are involved and which roles. Do I have role dependencies there? Am I doing this process? Is this a manual process or is this an automated process? Do these processes need to be clarified and aligned? Then I can do process classifications. I can do who would be the roles who should be doing it and who are the responsibles. All to do. Why? Because I need not only data ownership and reporting ownership, I also need process ownership within this. So we are seeing one can do very advanced thinking, not only using it as is documentations, but also using it as a to-be designed thinking, and to have documented the pain points within it, and advanced thinking of the transformation and ownerships within it. So I think we got the idea of literally the possibilities that such a thing has, in order to ensure that I am integrating these objects. I am ensuring that across multiple of these programs, which we are all seeing, these are the programs. Each one of them has a program. These were the objects involved. I'm ensuring that all of these programs, and the only one I actually showed was reporting. Please note this. These all other have all their own artifacts, but they will be doing it consistently against this. The data warehouse team can be working with their own artifact. But when they talk and touch the data warehouse, the data storage, the data components, the data tables, the data objects and the data services and the specific data rules and the information objects and the measurements, the following objects are the same. Measurements, because we had risk measurements. Information objects we had. And we had data objects. So it actually has 3 related objects that, unless it is ensured that it is handled the same way and integrated, there is no good linkage between it. So our lessons learned from this wonderful sessions that we have just had together are the takeaway, and our lessons learned I put all together here. Ensure consistency with project artifacts. All subject matter experts work in a standardized way. Ensuring cross integrations of artifacts if you have an underlying metamodel within it. And if you have standardized and integrated artifacts. If you don't have it and you don't know how to go about this, write me an email. I will later on show you my email address. I'm happy to help you along the way with this. Then you save time with having integrated and standardized artifacts. You can do reusability of the content. You can enable better governance and maintenance of the artifacts consistent time, which now we are talking obviously continuous improvement touching it. It is much less expensive than you have multiple teams who do it all their own, and it cannot be reused, and it doesn't know how to integrate because everybody called it something different. And it's much faster to populate across various teams because you have a standardized way. You develop routines. You maintain consistency among various team members and, by the way, artifacts, which is also the reasons for the reusability of the content, which is here the 5th bullet point. And the beauty now comes. You immediately lift the artifacts from a maturity 1, 0, where if it doesn't exist in your organizations, and if it does exist, it is 1, because if it is siloed, if your teams do it, if you allow teams to do it differently, then you have a maturity level 1. I don't care how much you are saying, yeah, but we are putting a lot of effort into it and a lot of money and a lot of governance. Yeah, that's my point. It doesn't matter what you are doing, you will keep on having a level 1 because level 1 is siloed. If you are using integrated artifacts, you immediately jump to a maturity level 3 which is documented and managed. So it's an immense amount of jump your entire enterprise can do with their IT and their IT work and their blueprinting and their modeling and their business modeling and their architecture and engineering disciplines. It develops a standard in the project teams and obviously in the architecture teams. And I guess I don't really, the last two, they're kind of more logical now because you then get things faster done. And it's much faster update. It's simplified to updates and do changes. This concludes the session on what are artifacts, how to work with them, how do you set them up, what's the basic structure with them, what's the value. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you have questions, you can write them to me, and I am happy to answer it unless you are a consultant. I am not interested to sit and teach or train consultants here. If you are a company and you need help, please feel free to write me an email. Thank you very much, and I hope you have a nice day.